Hi team, I just wanted to make a quick video for you explaining how to use the From Above framework, and it mostly has to do with a bunch of different types of parameters and things you adjust in terms of the processing and pre-processing phases. The idea of the framework is to take the input from the depth cam or from the RGB cam and then heavily treat it with pre-processing techniques such as turning it into grayscale, reducing the number of colors, applying thresholding, contrast, all that sort of stuff to then give us this processed image here, which is then what we pass into an algorithm which detects contours and then uses those contours to detect blobs. So the workflow from this is basically it goes from the Kinect camera, either the RGB camera or the IR camera, depending on what mode the software is set up in. And then it goes into OpenCV, which is the computer vision library. And then OpenCV will then apply these video processing techniques, pre-processing techniques, then processing techniques, and then we'll do contour and blob detection to then give us these blobs, which are then what we actually care about, right? And then part of the information that you get from these blobs is an X position and a Y position, and then you can use that information to build the rest of your program. Cool. So I'm just going to go over some of the controls that are built into this and what you want to actually do with it, because a big part of using this software is kind of configuring it specifically to the space you're in, and every space will behave differently. Right now I'm in my living room. I'm at the desk that I normally work at, and I'm just sitting here drinking some coffee and working on this code, right? But the Kinect is attached to my ceiling fan. It's maybe like 7.5 feet up, maybe 7 feet. So it's kind of similar to if you had the Kinect just facing straight down. You can see that the area that it covers is not very large. If I spread my arms, my wingspan sitting down on my office chair is actually larger than the sensing area here. So that's one thing to consider, is the placement of the Kinect, being really precise about that, looking at these video outputs, seeing what it shows you, and then just sort of changing it until you get something that you can use, right, that gives you a viewable range. So there are some keyboard controls that are built in, and they're denoted by this text down here. So H will actually toggle the text on and off. C will show you these contours, which are basically, as you can see, like these outlines or these borders. They're not the blobs, but they're what we use to actually determine the blobs. I inverts the color, which will drastically change how the input is being viewed, how many blobs you see, and will just drastically change how the algorithm behaves. Sometimes you want to invert it, sometimes you don't. It really depends on the specific space that you're using. The other thing that it has is background subtraction, which I believe, it's hard to tell. I don't know. So, and one of the most, I can't really tell which is which, unfortunately, right now, because there's also some thresholding that's going on. So I'm going to turn the thresholding. I don't know. Anyways, I'm getting distracted. But there we go. Okay, so that's not background subtraction. So you can see that it's basically analyzing all the information that's coming in from the camera and then trying to detect blobs based off of that. And some of the blobs it's detecting is like my rug on the floor and my desk and all these things that aren't actually things we care about. When it uses background subtraction, when it starts the background subtraction algorithm, so you want to start it when there's no one in the room, it will kind of figure out where this standard background is, and then ideally it will go in and then it'll subtract everything that is not a part of this background. As you can see, it's acting a little bit funky right now. This feature is sort of in beta. A lot of this I've had to implement myself, and it takes a lot of time, and you know, especially takes time to get it to behave the way you want. But anyways, so we also have M, which will change the camera input mode. And the three options we have is the RGB camera, which will actually be literally just like a webcam that you have. The other one is the depth camera, using grayscale to tell you the difference between the depth. and then the RGB depth camera where it will use color. So red being close, and then blue being far away. We don't see any blue here, but you can see that some of the green is slightly blue. Anyways, cool. So that's it as far as the key bindings for now. Also, we have some GUI sliders here, which will also give us other parameters. One thing that we have is the contrast, which actually, let's turn off the depth colors, go to RGB, it's easier to see. You can see the contrast there. And then we have the thresholding, which will basically look at the image. It's usually better for the depth cam, and it will throw away all pixels unless they're past a certain threshold. So this is just like a raw thresholding. We'll look at the overall like luminosity of the pixels, and then throw away everything that is, I believe, lighter. Yeah, lighter than that number. But it's something to mess around with. You can see that it drastically adjusts what we see in the processed image. And remember, it's the processed image here that is determining our tracking points and our blobs. And we don't want all of these crazy random blobs for things that are features in the room, right? So it's a matter of kind of adjusting this thresholding until it only then detects the things we care about, right? Like this is better. It has my two hands, right? And that's what we want. This is still a little too sensitive because we're getting that weird thing in the corner, you know, which we don't really know what it is, the 116 there, but it's closer. There's another type of thresholding that's built in now, which is the adaptive thresholding, which the idea of the adaptive thresholding is it should be more reliable in terms of putting the connecting weird angles and inconsistent lighting conditions. But the idea is just to mess around, use this toggle switch to toggle back and forth between regular thresholding and adaptive thresholding, and then just sort of fiddle with the controls until you get something that works best for what you're doing here. All right. There's also blur. So blur is pretty important oftentimes. Okay, so let's look at the image here. We'll turn our blur completely off. All right, so this is what our processed image is seeing at this point in the bottom left there. And you can see that there's a lot of very distinct outlines and sort of edges. Once we bring the blur up, it's able to condense down a lot of these smaller, less consistent features into something that's more usable, right? So the issue is if you don't have any blur, you generally will get a lot more of these false positives. You get a lot more of these blobs that you actually don't care about, that actually aren't something that you want to track, right? But if we blur it, then it sort of does a good job of condensing down. Oh, my thresholding is all out of whack. Alright, yeah, so it does a good job of sort of condensing down a lot of information into less information. So I think it's like defaults around 40, which is actually relatively high. So I want to mess around with blur. If you're finding that you're getting like way too many or just not enough blobs, then increasing the blur can oftentimes reduce sort of like the noise and what's going on and give you hopefully more reliable information. That being said, everything just depends on the ambient lighting in the space and yeah, exactly what's going on there. So for instance, right now, I'm just going to my ceiling fan and I'm readjusting the lights so it's on me better. And we're just using a regular RGB camera here. And it's actually doing, it looks like in my room right now, with the lighting that I have, This RGB camera seems to be doing a better job of tracking me than the depth cam is. Alright, so the other thing is min blob size. So this is a good one. So this is basically telling it, like, if I see like these tiny little things like that, like, don't call it a blob unless it's beyond a certain threshold, unless it's like yay big, right? So if we turn the min blob size down to 0, then every single contour that comes up will basically be labeled as a new blob, and we'll just get a ridiculous number. So this is super important in terms of finding kind of that sweet spot of like how large of an area do you want to exist before you actually call it a blob, right? And then the very last thing is brightness, which seems to be kind of broken right now. So my bad, I'm going to look in and see what the issue is there. There's some sort of bug in the code. So yeah, so hopefully that's helpful. The idea is that you want to look at this tracked points area and then try to get it so that it's tracking what you want and it's giving you what you want. And then what it gives you